for only the keeps of good energies and people that want to be here. Never mind the skeptics. They will eventually see. Not a moon, but the eve of everyone's anticipation. How are we feeling? The eve of everyone's anticipation. And I have gone through the astrology of it, not just with the last moon, but with another video, so I won't beat a dead horse per se. Which, interestingly enough, is still a horse to beat, considering that the Eastern Zodiac of the year will be the year of the horse. Granted, I reserve my energies for Lunar New Year and the astrological or energetic New Year. However, this is a prime time of habit building. The Gregorian calendar and Western astrology very much leads you to your ego. Eastern astrology will lead you to your heart, and indigenous astrology, animistic astrology will lead you to the soul. As far as the year of the horse goes, and my own observations, especially including planetary energies, because Jupiter is super bright. We're also finding out so much more about Jupiter and its intricacies and the stabilization, I suppose, of its own matter, as well as many other, especially within this new year, new ideas about its composition. And in a materialistic world, looking for the source, it is itself, Jupiter, the planet, not just a rock, not just this tangible thing. It is much more than just the gaseous thing, even, that we've considered it to be. And in fact, I think it goes to show a lot of what we're all collectively striving for and seeking core nature, core identity, source code, in so many ways, and why I've created the lectures and opportunities that I have. With that being said, and with the way Jupiter and Uranus is working together, is aligning within its retrogrades and this year of the horse, and from what I've observed, the horse that I continue to lead to drink, is that it's not just about the power. Understandably, and of course, horses are these beautiful creatures, these strong creatures, these muscular creatures, intimidating even with that. But because of our obsession with solar energy and chasing the sun and Gregorian calendar and its, cyclical vortex, inner vortex behavior, we're led to this point as a point of expansion or implosion. And more often than not, implosion, because it's anticipating the start rather than retaining energy to be able to feed. Force it, like waterboarding versus leading to water. And the horse is so much more than that. Even if handling a horse, when walking around it, when circumventing the space of the horse, you have to kind of maintain contact because they are such sensitive beings. So rather than it become this, and from what I've gathered, a lot of people's understandings is this, idea of strength, an idea of force, an idea of forcing their way into a new year, rather than understanding the subtleties, rather than cherishing the simplicities, rather than paying attention to those subtleties, and overlooking them until they bite you in the butt come, February, March, April, May, June. And again, when energies realign, when energies refresh and renew, when the lunar New Year comes as opposed to Gregorian calendar. Fun fact, horses also can't get DUIs because they are in and of itself conscientious of where they're going or what they're doing, and are capable of having such a capacity for memory, which I think will say a lot about our own understandings of sentience, our own understandings of consciousness, And that will be something that is called into question. And I think we'll, again, back to some ideas of the forcefulness or the strength of nature, does assert some empirical desires, some speciesism, I suppose, or elitism within that, unless the full understanding is to be had, unless the more expansive understanding is to be had, and again, the subtleties of that nature. Da, 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 da. With that being said, why don't we pull some cards for the oncoming 13 moons as a kind of reset. Oh, we're going to start with these. As a kind of reset. And see what it is that the energies can abide us to align. See what it is we've got to look forward to. And what it is we can pay attention as time retains its cyclical nature. Welcome, welcome. There are two things that you may notice are perhaps a little different than other readers that maybe you find readily available. And that is, while I do read traditional tarot, I also read cartomancy in numbers. I do believe and have a theory that time and space are this axial inseparateness, and numbers and spirit and tarot function very much in the same way. So we are able to get a little bit more present in time and detail oriented with numbers in a way that does directly place a hand within time. And then to fill the space, we bridge with spirit, essentially. The other thing that may be a little strange if you are new here, and if you are not, perhaps one of your favorite parts, is that I will have those willing to participate and viewing breathe with me. If you've ever done a one-on-one reading, we breathe together. So that I can tap into the energies, but utmost for you, so that you can tap into a full breath and into your own body and notice any sensations or thoughts that may arise. I ask you to make like a portal and be with me. Okay, I like that. I like that. All right. Full cycle of cards. What lies ahead? Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Ooh, I don't like, that's an interesting energy. It feels very disjointed. It reminds me of painting I did actually, about anxiety. Perhaps if somebody reminds me, I'll find it at the end. Where your body just feels very much like a Rubik's Cube. And collective, so take what resonates, apply what doesn't, apply what does, and perhaps what doesn't at this moment will apply itself in later moments. But very much disjointed, and I feel that is very much because a lot of us are still caught in this fricative state in between the past and the future. And that's the strange time, like that's the strange lingering in the air of time between Christmas and New Year's on the Gregorian calendar and in mainstream celebrations, is it kind of feels like this strange lull And it's because of so much anticipation. It's because of trying to anticipate a rhythm that is actually not in syncopacity with the calendrical system, or the astrological, like, horoscopic system. That's why there's a secret 13th sign versus the 12. More on that in a second. But it's also very much, the idea of anxiety or depression. Depression, I think, is often your energy is sort of caught in the past, or stuck in the past, stuck in, a memory of the past, or stuck in a feeling of the past in some way. Um, Likewise, I think anxiety, or when the two can run together, is when we're, so anticipating of what's coming, so expectant of what's coming, that the energy is caught in those places rather than present. This is also something that's true in traditional Chinese medicine, that fainting is essentially a physiological symptom of too much energy in the body, or excess energy out of the body, like energy depletion or energy excess, essentially. And so, when all of our energy is invested in a past or a future moment, we lose sight of the present, and the present sort of, abandons our present self. Our psyche abandons our present self, and then we wonder why this isn't happening. But then we go farther back here, and so the gap sort of widens. We stretch. We sort of tether ourselves in between those moments, and we balance on a very thin skin, because the psyche is not in coherence, because the mind and the heart, or what it is we're doing versus what it is we want to do, is not necessarily in coherence. It's like the hands aren't communicating with the brain. The body's not communicating with the brain, and it's very uncomfortable. 100%, my jaw was clenched, and so it's a lot of stress. That's a lot of tension. That's a lot of retention. That's a lot of suppression. In what ways are we, masking our desires? In what ways are we withholding our presence, or sort of dulling it down? In what ways are we caught in the tension between the memory or the idea and the attachment that it has on us for some reason or something? Whether that be an emotion attached to a memory, in a positive or negative way. This is how memory works. Or whether that be an idea or a goal, or a perception of self attached to a feeling that maybe we didn't choose for ourselves, in any specific way. This is also 100% why I think this is a great time for us to reconvene with our breath in these moments, so that you're more able to receive, because your energy is present rather than in anticipation or prediction. And despite what people may believe about reading or divination, it is very much like a particle collision, in which case the present moment is the moment that it occurs in, and it reads probability of that frequency rather than, prediction or future telling, I suppose. And in a way it also is, but it reads the potential. If you are to take this and maintain this frequency, then that momentum continues. If you make a sudden change of hearts, then that momentum also shifts and also changes. This is a key point in, timeline shifting, or frequency shifting, or identity shifting, and the ways in which it is happening all the time within us, and in our own perceptions. The ultimate simulation hologram is your perception, and is the ways in which you not just receive information but conjure information in your mind, because your eyes also receive information from imagination that feeds directly into the brainstem. So the ways in which we actually receive visual information does come from more than just the literal visual. That is not to say your sight is unreliable. That is to say, how curious can you be with it? How expansive can it be? And what is the capacity of your depth perception within the self? Because your shallow perception outside of the self is very much correlated to a shallow perception within, and then we get caught in these fricative states. One moon, two moon, three moon, four moon, five moon, six moon, seven moon, eight moon, nine moon, 10 moon, 11 moon, 12 moon, 13 moon. Ooh, bottom of the deck, Queen of Clubs, which is very much creative capacity, which is very much somebody who has a great desire, great inner fire, great collaboration with Eros, and is able to use it respectively. Conversely, if you have no idea what Eros is, if you demonize desire, if you live by puritanical values of abstinence or indulgence, then this is not a fire that is well kept. This is very much like hearth fire that is tended to, rather than recklessly driven. We've all seen somebody set fire to a fried turkey. We always hear every year that around the holidays is when there's lots of fires in the house or what have you, because of people cooking, because of people deep frying turkeys outside, etc., not having the proper fire safety handy, whatever it is. That is ego-driven, working with a material that perhaps they are not necessarily fully embodied in or fully aware of. This is also, ego-driven people who aren't willing to question themselves. It's the difference between confidence and conviction, and I know we've talked about that before, but confidence is very feeble and transparent. Conviction very much is rooted and comes from the inside out. It's a huge part of our eminence. So are we able to be a bright mind, or will we get sucked into the darkness of the world around us? Interesting bottom of the deck pull, because it is kind of very much the zeitgeist of everything, that rests above it. It is the difference between somebody who takes out their feelings on you, or somebody who takes their rage and trauma and wounds, dresses them, and helps others dress them, or uses that rage to create something new, uses that fire to pave a new path, uses that to sculpt something new and beautiful and delicate. This is like glassworking even. New boundaries, new fertile ground, new fertile land. It must exist in ash before it exists in gold, or exist under ash before it's blown away to be present. Which is also the thing. Every year I say, don't get ahead of yourself with Solar New Year, because it's very much designed for burnout. Everybody gets all geared up and in a rage and in a tiffy, and makes these big goals, but doesn't necessarily put in, because of all the holidays before and whatever, the way time moves, the way time is fast, doesn't necessarily put in all the roots down that they need to make these goals accomplishable. And then come, early spring, midsummer, people are like, oh, I thought it'd be better, I thought it'd be more, I failed this thing, and give up on themselves, essentially. Gregorian calendar is very much designed to keep you just below integrity. In the same way a lot of systems are. I'm definitely not the only one that said AA is very much designed that way, deliberately so, deliberately interwoven in religiosity and dogma, all by design, and to keep people just below, integral use of their eros. Even the ways in which online stimuli in various kinds is so prevalent, is so common knowledge, is so talked about, younger and younger even, is very much designed to further this demonization of what desire is, so that we're never able to utilize it for its creative power, so that we're always caught in the fricative nature of rejecting it and accepting it and rejecting it and accepting it, rather than being like, hey, wait, this actually might be something like this feeling, this excitement feels like inspiration. What can I do with this? What can I make with this? You know, how can I show the world this feeling, this love, this acceptance? Ultimately, I think that's what a lot of people want, is not just acceptance from the outside world, but acceptance from the inside out. And you're not gonna get it on the outside world without the inside. And again, caught between freaking of nature of accepting and rejecting the self or experience or past or, you know, worthiness, and whether or not, and whether or not, and that exists very much in a linear timeline, as if always, part of this cause and effect friction, rather than understanding how all of those experiences sort of trickle into, or can trickle into, another. Especially if you work within timelines and versions of yourself, and healing younger youth you. I do feel like to go into that moment and offer what you know now very much changes that moment then to empower the now. It's almost like all of these loose threads find their tethering, and come in to form an actual tapestry or an actual pattern. And you are that pattern. You are that radiation, that eminence. But when we're distracted with the past and distracted with the future, and rejecting of one and longing for another, that very much frays the edges and puts tension in places that aren't helpful. The body tells you this as well. Moving on. Gosh, okay, before we do too, because I saw like a preview of that, Five of Diamonds would go with this Queen of Wands, and so that's very much, I think a lot of people will probably get invested in Kundalini awakening and stuff like that, failing to recognize that it's not just about power, it is about ego death. And that becomes a neutral space of grand capacity and of, ultimate creativity, because you're able to see more clearly. This is very much like the lobby of where all of our energy sits. And, all of these are elevator doors to go one place or another. And when you're just focused on, ego-driven, Kundalini rising, by Western context, because Tantra, in its traditional right, is not the way the Western world understands it. But then we're, raising to a detriment, and failing to root, and failing to ground, and failing to embody. It's like, people do all this acid, but they never integrate the experience, so they find, being on Earth is harder and harder, or being human is harder and harder, because they're not able to blend the two truths, or blend the two realities. And this also has a definite idea with our ideas of truth, and whether or not there is an expansive definition of that, which is absolutely something I've explored etymologically, in my necromantic autopsy of truth. In my necromantic autopsy of truth, in which one clear nugget of wisdom in Tsaye is a word for truth, but like truth with a capital T, as in a collaboration of truths. My reality and your reality are able to find an understanding, and thus something builds. I extend a lot of my research on that in the geometry of relationships, which is a more I guess, modern geometric take on the idea of right relationship, um, as well as the many ideas that relationships have in these days. So that's all free. Party on. That's more information for you. A little background knowledge. Um, but consider also what lies in the basement. Consider also taking the stairs. Consider also the many paths that your energy can go rather than just what you have seen before. And this is also something that I've read in science journals about assisted death. And a preliminary qualification for it is whether or not you have known anybody with your diagnosis, whether or not you have known anybody to get well with your diagnosis. And that is such a interesting, deliberately vague and obfuscating gateway, I suppose. And by those metrics, nobody qualifies for it, and yet here we are. But anyway, moving on. So 13 moons would be looking kind of January, February, March, April. I feel like rough start for sure. General masses, especially in the celebrations. I feel like a lot of people, again, on that fricative nature of indulgence or abstinence, are either staying home, being sober, and isolating themselves, or are going out recklessly, which I may not celebrate the solar new year. I've worked it time and time again. I promise you, not anything you're really missing. People pretty much burn themselves out by 11 midnight. I remember so many times where I'd be throwing people out, dodging throw up by like 11:50. So you're not missing much. Everybody gets burnt out. It's pretty much just industry people out doing anything after a certain hour, and the absolute recklessness of the indulgers, the overindulgers. There's nothing wrong with indulgence, but the overindulgers. The ones drinking to hide some shit. Which, no judgment, we've all been there. You just gotta face it at some point or another. But, abstinence, indulgence. Oh, rough start. We've got some very foggy blues, some very, transparent blues, which, not sexy Krishna blue, not mercurial, but, very foggy, very, malaise even. I feel like it's a very dreary color. And that's not necessarily all bad either, because I love a foggy rainy day because the lights reflect more. And I think if the lights can expand, then information can expand. So it always excites me quite a bit. And that is ultimately, I think, the magic of the season is, festival of lights in so many ways. And ultimately, I think Halloween sets the altar for us to call the ancestors home on those days where the hearth is most bright, and the darkest of the night leads way to brighter lights for us to call ancestors home, to set altar to. So it's still a very beautiful season if you're willing to see it that way. Not everybody likes a dreary season. Honestly, the barometric pressure has been changing a lot, and I know that causes a lot of pain. Breath work 100% helps me more than anything, especially with allergy seasons, especially with sudden weather changes, especially with the cold and soreness, arthritis, headaches, it's harder to breathe cold air. Doing breath work on a regular basis has absolutely helped me acclimate in finding comfort in those particularly uncomfortable times in a literal physiological way, but yes, also in a psychological way. But most maybe both, really. And it is very much a space of creation. Again, Five of Wands. So it's possibility, it's imagination. It's not necessarily firm boundaries, but it is ideas of them. It's like working within the habit field. We have these structures of ideas and we can workshop them in this. If this feels like a tower time to people, again, see it as a beautiful opportunity, because the tower may fall, but that is only because it did not have a stable structure. That is only because it was not built well or properly, or with integrity or intention. And so the tower is a beautiful opportunity to create the most stable, balanced, uh, you know, well solidified structure, and be able to continue to see building on that because you know that there's solid roots. The tower is a really beautiful opportunity to not just create monoliths for the sake of monoliths, obelisks for the sake of obelisks, but because they feed the ground, because they also uh, innervate with like the natural earth systems, very much in the same way that statuary to Shiva Lingam also has like an insertion aspect to it. It sort of inserts itself into the earth, or the earth accepts it in a way. That is also very much what this tattoo was. Is. 5 of clubs, 4 of clubs. It's like 2 steps back, 1 step forward. That may not feel like enough progress, especially right away for a lot of people, but that is okay. Again, be patient. This is time for the rooting. This is time for fermenting. This is time for, if you didn't rake your leaves, to be feeding the ground. The 9 of diamonds would be all of those leaves, precisely that, feeding the ground. Look at that beautiful like emerald green too, which is very much long-term growth, which is very much, I want to say like the gift of pine too, even the gift of like long burning embers, and even in that it's regenerative. It gives back wood. It can give shelter. It can give so many things. Let us not underestimate the diligence of our heart when it is at ease. Of course, we don't feel like it's enough when we're constantly moving for somebody else, through somebody else, towards something else that somebody else told us that we wanted, or that dictates in some way, shape, or form. But lush does the garden grow when we are able to move with our heart and water ourselves in a way that expands the ways that we can give back to ourselves and give back to other people. It's very much like when you take care of yourself, and people love seeing that you're happy, and people love seeing that you're doing well, or like being surrounded by gratitude. So maybe that, especially with this 5 and the 4, maybe that's something to really hold on to moving into Lunar New Year, energetic New Year, as the winter closes and moves into the spring. Retain gratitude as much as possible. Even though everybody else is setting their goals and trying to change every aspect of who they are without really knowing who they are first, cherish what you know, cherish what you don't know, and cherish what you are willing to learn. And that will psych you up to be able to move into integrity and creativity come the spring, truly moving. 3 of spades, come, what would that be? Maybe like moving into the spring equinox. 3 of spades is much akin to the 3 of hearts. However, rather than to look at that as heartbreak, consider looking at it as knowing what you stand for, knowing what you bleed for, and knowing what all of it amounts to. If you have not dealt with your past in a way that allows you to find ease in your bones, and that they are not echoing with pain, and I mean that figuratively, but also literally in so many ways, then they will continue. They will continue to rattle like ghosts in the closet. But if we're able to look back and look at the self honestly, and perhaps it is heartbreak, but what a beautiful thing to know that you are capable of love and loving in such a way. Perhaps it is feeling stabbed in the back, But what a beautiful thing to know that you are still capable of trust despite the times that you have been burned. What a good thing to know, especially in those moments. Like, I feel like there are always opportunities where I reflect and I'm like, ah, my intuition was telling me this and this and this, and there's always a lesson there. Um, some of my favorites, in fact, and oftentimes I think, especially when you are, I guess, a sensitive person, you tend to give people the benefit of the doubt where they may not offer that in return. And in particular, uh, let us not wait around for people to prove us wrong. Let's just move with what we have also verified. It's not like we're just like, I'm right and you're wrong. Like, ideally, you're very well researched, you're, exploring opportunities, exploring possibilities, scientific method is looking for the flaws. In which case, if you've already had, like, you're not challenging your intuition by being like, what if I'm wrong and they're actually a really good person? No, go with what you feel, because I think people will get more and more transparent about their true colors, and so perhaps this is a time of a hard lesson, but one that gears you up to ride with more skill. I don't want to say faster and harder, because that's not necessarily what the horse needs either. However, I'm sure that will occur, in which case we require more grace. If you've ever ran a horse, it requires a lot of effort on your part too. And so that's something that perhaps we need to be ready for. Ace of Diamonds and an Ace of Hearts. Ace of Diamonds, Six of Diamonds, Ace of Hearts. A challenge, but a major growth. This is very much like big, bright growth spurt, like rose out of concrete. Really, look at that color palette. Like a rose out of concrete and out of a southern direction. So again, the rooting, the ways in which we root to the system, the ways in which we're able to communicate through that rooting system, which is again subtle frequencies, not outright communication. And that's something that keeps coming up for me too. Is, yes, you're the horse, and yes, subtle frequencies, but more so than just strength, like, the ways in which trees are sturdy and strong and huge and towering, but also the ways in which every inch of their root system is communicating silently with each other, with species that it does know and that it doesn't know, and constantly adjusting within the most sensitive and subtle frequencies in the world, in the earth. And that, I think, is ultimately a key point and a key lesson in this time coming. Evidently so. Because even planting a rose bush requires deep rooting, requires deep work on the tree of death, requires deep work on ego death, requires deep work expanding the self beyond the ego. It's not just kill the ego and sever the head. Like, expand the self beyond the ego. You are not just, it got you this far, but it's also time for an update in a lot of ways. And that can't happen when we're reliant on the system to identify. And not necessarily just the system, but like the systems that we have been programming and programmed into as is, or as of now, as thus far. Ace of Diamonds and the Ace of Hearts I really like too, because I feel like it's like a hopeful growth, like a spurt of growth, that's actually like quite powerful and is a direct reflection of the spurt of growth in the heart. So the spurt of personal growth is directly in relation to a spurt of fiscal, financial, material growth, or tangible growth, or expansive growth in some way, shape, or form. And that may not be hundreds of roses on the bushel. That may not be hundreds of rosebuds. That may be one beautiful, glorious rosebud, and a very, very, very healthy root network system that can survive all drought. Desert wisdom. Queen of diamonds after. Ooh, and Queen of diamonds after, and check out this beautiful teal, right? Teal turquoise. Queen of diamonds after. Not just what I said, but like, and not just tangible, but felt. Because diamonds is also very much earth ridden. It's very much a grounding force, and so while so many are off far-reaching and longing and wanton, and also demonizing their desire and suppressing their creativity because of it, the Queen of Diamonds understanding this rooting system, understanding this southern direction, understanding this internal work, hidden work, behind the scenes kind of work, is also understanding that it is much more felt than it may be seen. And that may also mean that, like, like cringe or ridicule becomes sort of like dust off your shoulder, because you can feel the difference between the way it is that your heart and your essence are validating yourself versus the ways it is you fear or are empowered by external validation or social validation or status driven validation. It's interesting how many different kinds there can be, eh? Spiritual growth is also the thing, and that'll be interesting to see, because as the year moves, I feel like that will also come into ideas of preparing for Halloween and what have you. And there's always people that, like, all year are like, day one of almost Halloween, like tomorrow, or it'll be Easter and people are like, can't wait for Halloween. Love those people. However, there are also people that I think are giving so much authority to something outside of themselves that they've lost sight of their direction, and utilize that time to sow fear, utilize that time to sow warnings and doubts, and so I feel like, again, from so many different angles, though it may feel like we're not able to expand physically outside the root system. The root system survives everything, and there's so many angles of other people's oppression and opinions, but when you see clearly past that programming into the self, then that becomes, pshaw, unnecessary, not a part of the equation, not a part of the problem. I feel like there'll be fear of what's felt versus what's seen. I feel like a lot of people are converting to religion, and that creates a lot of witch hunts and creates a lot of, pointing fingers, and in general that creates a lot of mob mentality around what is accepted or rejected, and a lot of fear around what can be believed. Honestly, even in scientific community, just because there is no evidence yet does not mean that it does not exist. Just because there, is a hole, or is a hole in the information, or is a hole in the theory, doesn't mean that it is entirely non-working, non-existent, not worth study. Which is why so many interesting papers will really just end with requires more study, especially if you research stuff like this. 3 of Hearts, 9 of Hearts, moving into the seasons. 3 of Hearts is sharing, but it's a much smaller table than perhaps the ones that we have tried to welcome before. Things get nodded in 5 of Diamonds when we're doing 7 of Diamonds, too much, not enough kind of stuff. Or 7 of Swords, too much, not enough kind of stuff. And I think the 3 of Hearts is like, in a world driven by fear, who do you trust? Perhaps our circles get smaller, but perhaps our circles get more intentional because of that. And ways in which we're sharing like big stories, big deals, big lessons, big goals, big learnings, with people that share that. Because it's not just like people that matter, with people that share that and are able to reciprocate excitement or interest in some way, shape, or form. And again, that's kind of going back to, geometry of relationships. Too often, are we in relationships where we're not even going for the same goal, or where we're in disagreement about what the goal is? I think that's why, older couples will say, because love is an everyday choice, being with you is an everyday choice. And that's not like every day I think about leaving you. That is every day I wake up and I choose to, find beauty in the moment with you, and choose to make you laugh, and choose to want to make you feel better, and choose to, want to make your day easier, and choose to da 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 da. And that means they're constantly participating in it. The same is true in good and evil. There's no such thing as a good person. There's maybe no such thing as a bad person. I know that's going to piss somebody off. But bear with me. A good person is capable of doing terrible things, and a bad person may be capable of redemption if they so choose it. We are not beholden to our patterns. And so, in that, I think that's also the ways in which we choose to show up for ourselves every day. Even when the world is burning, how do you choose to assist with the burns, to assist with bandaging, to assist with the wounds, to assist with the fire, or with the putting it out? And this will be, I think, an interesting connection of either teams or people or ideas later into the year that will really make things click in a lot of ways, in a more than literal way, in an unexpectedly expansive way, which is interesting too, because I think that would be like a school break, really, as far as time goes. Interesting. 9 of Hearts, 2 of Clubs, 7 of Diamonds, 8 of Spades. I will say the 8 of Spades is an interesting space to kind of land on, because that would essentially be like same time next year. 8 of Spades, get off your own tail. Like get out of your own head, get off your own tail, get out of the pattern, do something that surprises even you, and see where it takes you. Because when you do that, it's always it's always a wonderful surprise, and you're able to go much farther than you thought you could go. When you, I guess, kind of like positively what if yourself, it's like improv. That's what it is. It's like improv when you yes and a situation. And that's not to say yes to everything. Again, use inner self-determination. But it is to say, have you known yourself in things that you wanted to yes before? How do you know yourself when you don't really know? Maybe that's the beautiful curiosity of it. Like, could I ever be a pop star? I don't know. Maybe that's the better answer than like, no way, I can't see it, and laughing at yourself or whatever. Making a mockery of yourself, rather than imagining that the impossible is very possible. The impossible is quite possible. What if? Why not? Do you trust yourself enough? Do you trust the universe in hand? The 9 of Hearts is the brightest card of all of this. And I feel like when we're able to pattern build in that frequency, then we constantly are moving we're constantly moving just outside of our, of the spiral. We're constantly growing in that way. And it's the same way that like plants will build new leaves, or new seeds. It's regenerative growth. It's cellular regenerative growth, optimal growth. When we're able to see possibility in the paradigm and see beyond the patterning. Two of Wands, Seven of Diamonds, the reflection of that pattern, the reflection of that feeling is very much something that gives back into the environment, gives back into building, gives back into, honestly, I think even a way in which we venerate the moment. Veneralize, is that a word? How we venerate the moment. It's not all just ancestral veneration either. Veneration to the moment, veneration to the land, veneration to the present. That's why there is much more than just 4 directions or 4 dimensions. I would argue that there's even more than 7. But various systems have various different ways of illustrating it in a 2-dimensional way. Utmost, you can say 4+. I like to think of it as like LGBTQIA+ is how I look at the dimensions, really. I think there's more than 7. I think there's more than 9 dimensions and directions. Da, 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 da. Which is interesting too, because if there's traditional 7 directions, and the 8 of Swords here is also your direction, is also how you become the 8th direction, and how you continue ancestral work, honorable work, how you continue the life cycle, how you continue whatever pattern it is you're ultimately trying to build, how you fractal, slightly unlike yourself. Much like crystals even will crack and cleave, and they're 2 separate entities now, but they are similar and same, and respond to light and respond to sound, and will cleave again and create something slightly unlike itself as well. How do we not fracture as in separate ourselves and break ourselves in half, but fractal as a whole into another whole, as a whole being into something whole and growing? I think we're going to figure that out in a great way. I think that could also very much be a difficult thing to grasp and understand for a lot of people, cis men, cis women, and everybody involved in alike, because the world has such a finite idea of limitations around what we are able to create, which is why so many people identify womanhood with labor and conceiving as purpose. And ultimately, I think that's a colonialist exploitation. I think the nuclear family dynamic is also very much a colonial myth and mode of control. And so, in a very beautiful way, I think perhaps this will be a time where Wave of Feminism understands more deeply that parent or not, you are an elder to the world. And that so much more outside of conception exists in creation. Ideally, all of us will realize that, especially cis male politicians, and not equate creation to such a small and limited scope of view or mode of doing. Honestly, queer it all up, really, because I always say the most feminine thing you can do is create. The most masculine thing you can do is honor that creation. Ultimately, if you create and you nurture, your projection of that emanation is your creation. And that is a vibration, that is a frequency, that is an idea, that is a project, that is an identity. I've always said that I think a really good example of this is drag performers, performers in general, but specifically in conversations I've had with drag performers, they very much create this identity, and then they also have to defend it to a world that doesn't understand it, or that sees it superficially, objectifies it, or what have you. But you maintain the integrity of the creation because it was a piece of themselves, and not a piece as in a fragment, but a piece as in a whole other living, breathing, thriving creation. So perhaps this is a year of great masterworks. Perhaps this is a year where we understand non-duality and where we queer up the pool, and we understand that even people that maybe want kids but don't have kids or can't conceive understand that you still can parent all the children of the world. You still can parent, in beautiful ways, nurturing life, nurturing your surroundings, nurturing your environment is how you continue that cycle and create things that maybe literal eyes don't see but surely feel. And that will be all of the game changers. So realistically, a lot of this I think will be us rehashing these sort of milestones or quarter life, midlife crises, or understandings of self-worth and value, with new goalposts, with new ideas of where that milestone really sits, rather than the government told me my purpose is to birth, and my father told me my purpose was to be submissive, and my pastor told me that my purpose was to obey, and etc., 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 etc. Because it is not. It is not. Even nature disobeys, but it always optimizes growth. And I think always strives toward beauty. Even the original idea of Gothic in architecture was not just, black and ravens and death and coolness, as much as I love that, was about capturing the balance of nature in organic form in sculpture. So it was kind of a nature worship in and of itself at its conception. So do with that what you will. I think that's still why I'm goth. Very much so. The most goth thing you can do is love nature. Gosh, so many interesting colors here. So many. Okay, spirit card. A bridge to the world. Ooh, I did say a lot about understanding femininity, but also I think a huge part of something that I was able to really thoroughly uncover and learn, especially through my Banish the Patriarchy, I guess, lecture activation course, is very much that the system as it is does not optimize growth for any of us. It is optimized to create slaves in some way, shape, or form. That has been what has continuously evolved by this system, by this current American Western governmental system. The sooner that masculinity also realizes this, perhaps with the assistance of feminine nature that I think assists all of this, the sooner that they realize that they are also tagged cattle for the system, all the better. And I think, much like femininity or womanhood can't be equated to conception, masculinity cannot be equated to provisions either, because the system is not designed to help you provide or to provide for you either. And so we have, a lot of men that don't understand what it is to be men, and that's also because the system that they have been conned into protecting was never designed to help them or optimize their growth either. So, some hard truths. You heard them here first. I can't wait to see how this unfolds more. But I'm also very excited because I, myself, have devised an experiment to expand that understanding and to collaborate with it as a non-dual truth. So check out my website. Okay. My friends, shall we take some more breaths together and find a bridge for all of this information on time and space? Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Okay, interesting. I will say, maybe some of us aren't really holding on to the past that tight after all. Maybe so loosely so. Maybe so loosely so that we don't really have a stable grip on who we are, why we are, what has become. So many people mirror identities too, and again, that's because of our fucked up idea of relationships, our misunderstandings of love, the demonization of eros, and again, nuclear family concepts where we're tricked into thinking, 50-50, blah, 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 find my other half, blah, blah, blah. And in reality, no, you are whole. You do not orbit around another as if they were the sun. Even stars know this and have up to 7, I think more even, but last I read, 7 genders of relationships between them in which they rotate around each other. They oscillate toroidal functions rather than dominant frequency. And so, have you ridden the wave of somebody's dominant frequency, or do you know somebody that's ridden the wave of the dominant frequency so much so that when that frequency stops or changes, so do they? Now's also a time where a lot of people are going to have to get a grip on who they are, why they are, how they are, and who they want to be. And I think so many people have a very loose grip on their own stability, but have a very tight grip around their expectations and their projections. And projections aren't all bad, and I don't know, generally expectations are not my bag, but projections aren't all bad. Life is a projection, reality is a projection. This is the simulation theory, this is the hologram theory, but are you a projection of, again, some other bullshit dominant frequency, or are you a projection of your inner love, of the stars, of the contrast and complexity and defining components of light and dark in the world? What else did I feel? All of that action in either loose grip or grasping wantonness, also lost contact with source, lost contact with my chest, lost contact with the shoulders, and so in a very real way, I think that's going back to solar plexus chakra, heart chakra, and expanding that before we get super hardcore in the throat chakra. Granted, it's going to happen for all of us anyway, and I do think there's a lot of that vibration already happening that is expanding our awareness all across the board. However, do a little solar plexus work, and perhaps watch my last moon video, because there's a difference between just finding confidence, manifesting the glamour of confidence, feeble, transparent, very easy to cut off at the knees, or understanding your convictions, understanding not just your marketed purpose, but the power behind your passions. I think purpose has also become a very commodified word, very market-heavy, hashtagable word. But the power of your passion is something that marketing can't touch. It's something that, again, is experienced, is felt, before it is seen, before it is believed. And thus there is no room for doubt. People don't experience, sacred lands and leave untouched. People don't experience, ghosts and leave non-believers. The same can be said of you, and whatever spirit you choose. And I don't mean that as in the literal invocation either. I mean the spirit of your joy, the spirit of your desire, the spirit of your creativity, the spirit of your most honest, authentic self, the spirit of your rawness, the spirit of your truth. Okay. Bam. Okay. Interesting. 8 of Wands, top of the deck. And the Hermit at the bottom of the deck, the Zeitgeist. Interestingly enough, this goes hand in hand with what I just said, because the Hermit is also inverted. So let us not be misled by the idea of, again, abstinence or indulgence. Abstinence being isolation, being hermiting away. What I had said about feeling and experiencing in order to be believed is also something that has to be internalized, because the Hermit doesn't turn away from society because they don't understand him. The Hermit doesn't isolate because society doesn't get him. The Hermit says, all right, you aren't hearing me right now. The message will stay the same, but I'm going to take my message here, and you can come find me when you're ready. I'm going to cut out the middleman. I'm going to cut out the nonsense. I'm going to cut out the bullshit, and I'm going to give you the message when you're ready. I'm going to give you the knowledge, the wisdom, the light when you're ready. It's already here, but are you ready to see it? It's already here, but are you ready to hear it? And that's, the interesting thing about people's perception and being able to meet you where you're at, too. So let's not get swept away, again, by, dominant frequency, by people that, frustrating for me, people that need to be told by some white guy the same things I say before they believe it. It never ever fails to baffle me, especially when I was working in the human world. You'd be surprised how much people can project this identity and then also behave in a very different way, projecting the very ideals that they purport to be opposed to. And in a very real way, understand, in that solar plexus region, confidence comes when you've established conviction, because you also have nothing to prove to nobody. You got nothing to prove to nobody but yourself. You got nothing to compare to nobody but yourself. Honestly, even the ideas of better or worse, or better or worse, or back then when it was better, or will the future be better or worse? Put all those possibilities to rest, because it's a lot of opinions, and ultimately ask yourself about the things that you care about and what it is that you want to put your energy to imagining even changing. And again, cut out the bullshit, cut out the middleman, cut out the nonsense, and don't retreat, but stand on business, stand firm in your truth. Like the hills that we die on is very much kind of this expression too. What you know to be true because you've studied it, not just because you've heard it, because this is a monolith tower that you were able to build with a stable structure that cannot be torn down, not because you're rejecting of information, because you are always accepting new information with discretion. But build that tower, make that your hill, and others will follow. Rather than feel like it's retreating, rather than feel like you have to retreat until you can find another way to prove that you have this rose, that you have these roots, that you have this knowledge, that you have this capacity, this capability. You gotta prove it to yourself before you can prove it to anybody else. And that's maybe less forceful horse again, but more so about the subtle frequencies of what that really means. And the inner projection of your sensory relation to any ideals that we have. If the ideal version of you can't be present because it's too busy worrying about the past or the future, then we mitigate and we bring the central focus back so that you can find a present projection, and that more momentum will follow because there's more internal force behind it. Happy Gregorian New Year. I have also designed an astrological calendar so that you can take your Western horoscope, apply it to 13 sign astrology, apply it to 20 sign astrology, or indigenous astrology via Telegi, Cherokee, and Michigan astrologies, so that you can also use it as a day-to-day calendar and understand the elements that were given in the 12, but also the ways in which that innervates and chemically composes with elements of more expanded energies. From what I've gathered and from my research and calculations, Western astrology is just short of a positive fractal behavior. The ways in which the 12 signs divides into the full year, which isn't even just 300 days, because the earth is moving faster, so we're accounting for decimal integers, and because of that repeating, we would get more so inward vortex like behavior with the 12 signs, which I think is why Western society has such a proponent for psychosis, really. What an inward vortex, what a self-proposed an internal propulsion towards self-destruction. And so I think when we're able to expand this frequency in, interestingly enough, golden ratio integers and phi ratio integers, finding innervation within golden angles and arcs, then we are able to better understand why the 12 signs is so fragmented and how that energy can interact with the other subtle energies around us. The ways in which so many magical calendars have worked in the past has been based off of outdated ideas of planetary and astrological alignments, and so I wanted to bring a new thread of time to be able to expand in my world and in any world that it so touches. So, if any of this sounds interesting to you, again, please check out my website. And as far as meditation goes, because this is also very extensive, there's a lot of energies going around. There is a new short meditation video on YouTube as well, that is designed to be standalone, but also to work with this astrological calendar codex that I designed. So, dabble in the meditation for free, draw your energy back to center, and continue to do that in whatever ways you choose to and ritualize as the time unfolds, so that you can be more centrally focused, more presently aware, and ideally expand your depth perception both inward and out. And so I leave you with that. May you find your optimal frequency on this timeline and any other. Squat, okay.